So my story begins when I am 42 weeks pregnant, and I was trying everything to get labor started. I was going to acupuncture, and I was using essential oils, and I was eating spicy food, and I was having awkward sex, and nothing is working. So very reluctantly, I show up at the hospital to be induced. So I was induced with Cytotec, and several hours later, labor finally begins. But for me, there was no early labor. My contractions basically within minutes were back to back to back. So I had a whole plan for an unmedicated water birth. But after 12 hours of contractions that were really with no break, I had only dilated to 2 centimeters, and that was really discouraging. So at that point, I decided to get an epidural. So I got the epidural, and fast forward another several hours go by, and I've spiked a fever. And it's apparent that I've developed some kind of infection, and that no one really knows why. But I need antibiotics, and the doctors tell me that my baby, once he's born, is going to need antibiotics as well. So the new plan is that I'm going to have my baby, I'm going to hold him for 45 minutes, and then he's going to be taken to the nursery. My husband's going to go with him, and he's going to get an IV with antibiotics. So I don't love this plan, but I didn't really feel at that point like I had any choice. So it's time to push. I pushed for 2 hours, and during this time, because of the whole situation with the infection, all of these doctors and nurses from the special care nursery are coming into the room. So it's very crowded. It's really disorienting. There's all these people just kind of hovering there. And my son is born, and he doesn't cry right away. So because there are all of these extra people in the room, these special care nursery people, they demand that instantly the cord is cut and he is whisked across the room where they have a little incubator set up in the corner. He's fine. He cries before he even gets across the room. So I'm like yelling to my husband who's over there, like, what is going on? Bring this baby back. Why don't I have my baby? So finally they bring him back, and I hold him, and he is perfect and he's wonderful. But this is when things start to get bad. So my placenta hasn't come out yet. And the midwife is having me push, and she's like moving my legs around and trying to get me to try different things, and nothing is happening. And all I can feel is a lot of blood pouring out of my body. And so at this point, she's getting concerned. And so she calls in a doctor, an OB who I had never met before. And she comes in, and they consult. And the first thing that the doctor has me do is she makes me give my baby back to my husband. And she makes my husband go to the other side of the room and sit in a chair where I can't see him. She makes me lie flat on my back, so I can't really see anything that's going on in the room. And then she comes to me and she says, okay, you have 2 choices. Finally, a choice. So she said, I can put you under general anesthesia, and I can remove your placenta surgically. Or if you let me, I think I can do it right here with my hands, but it's not going to feel good. So I know that general anesthesia means that I'm not going to hold my baby for hours. So I decide to go for the other option. So at this point, one of the nurses suggests that they give me fentanyl to kind of help me through this process. So they put fentanyl through my IV, and I didn't know what that was at the time. But suddenly, my head is spinning, and I'm like floating above my body, and it's horrible. And I'm really scared, and there are tears just streaming down my face, and I don't really understand why this is happening. And I'm totally disoriented. And so the doctor starts reaching into my uterus and pulling out my placenta, and it doesn't happen in one pass. This is like piece by piece by piece. And so it takes a while, and finally she stops, and she looks at me, and she's like, I'm pretty sure I got it all. And I'm like, okay. So at that point, I look up, and I see my husband, and he's being pulled out of the room by a nurse with the baby. And he's looking back at me, and he just looks really concerned and scared, and I look at him, and he's just pulled out of the room. And then all of a sudden, my throat closes, and I can't breathe. And I'm gasping for air, and I'm trying to tell the nurse and the midwife who are with me, something is wrong, and I'm convinced that I'm having a reaction to one of the drugs that's going through my system. And in reality, I'm having a panic attack, and they're trying to convince me of that and trying to help me breathe and calm down, and they're putting an oxygen mask on me, and I'm just gasping for air and crying and crying. And finally, slowly, I start to calm down. My breath finally feels like it returns to normal. And then right at that moment, I feel the doctor's fingers go up my butt. She was inserting more Cytotec, which is apparently a thing that they do to help stop the bleeding. But I am like firmly of the belief that nothing should ever go up the butt without fair warning. So this is like pretty upsetting. So anyway, then all of a sudden, very suddenly, the room empties and I'm alone. Apparently there was like some kind of emergency happening on the floor. So I'm by myself and I'm crying and I'm shaking and there's so much blood and it was just awful. And so eventually my husband and my son come back and a very kind nurse comes in and she cleans me up and she tries to get me into a wheelchair, but I can't stand up. And every time I so much as try to sit up, I pass out. And I don't know until the next day that I've lost a really dangerous amount of blood. So I got blood transfusions before I left the hospital, which everyone told me was going to make me feel so much better. But in reality, I went home feeling sick and broken and traumatized. And that lasted for a really long time. I kept waiting to experience this kind of overwhelming joy that it seemed like everyone around me was telling me that I should be experiencing. And I did. I loved my son. I was connected to him, and I loved him so much from the first instant. But that love existed alongside a lot of pain and sadness. And for a long time, I would just replay this series of events in my head over and over again. And I couldn't think about anything else. And there were more panic attacks, and there were flashbacks. And eventually, very slowly, over time, I started to heal. And now I just feel really grateful. My son is 19 months and he's amazing and thriving, and I'm really grateful to him for being the reason for my healing. And I'm grateful to be able to share this story today. So thank you.